Hey folks, welcome back and welcome to the continuation in this little series all about EQ, covering all of the fundamental stuff that you need to know about EQ in order to understand what you are doing. Today we are going to be getting into some actual practical applications, so let's do it. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at how we actually go about EQing something. We're going to talk about the different ways that you can EQ and what it is that we are looking for, what it is that we're trying to achieve. To do that, I've got a little loop that I've set up in my project. This is nothing special. This is just loops that I've nicked from the Apple Loops library. You can see all their names there if you happen to like them and you want to stick them in your projects. But this is nothing fancy. It's just for illustrative purposes. Now, to begin with, it is crucial to establish what we can actually do with equalizing, with EQing. What is the objective? Well, there are actually only two main ways that you can EQ. You can either do what's called subtractive EQing, that is taking stuff away, or you can do what's called additive EQing, that is adding stuff. Those terms actually have a secondary term, if you like, associated with them, which might help you understand what they mean a little bit better. So subtractive EQ is often referred to as corrective EQ. So we may think of subtractive EQ as looking for problems within the sound that we need to address. That might be a resonant frequency, or that might be a frequency that is masking something else in the mix. But subtractive EQ can be seen as looking for problems and trying to fix them. The second main type of EQ we're looking at, which is the additive EQ, can also be referred to as creative EQ. So rather than looking for problems, we are now looking for things that we want to enhance or things that we want to change. So we're no longer correcting things, but we are making things different or enhancing things. So those are our two main types, if you like. Before we get into any actual EQing applications, there are two big rules that you should be aware of though. The first is that equalizing anything cannot fix a poor recording. If you have a poor recording, if you can hear loads of strange reflections from the room, or if you can hear loads of resonant frequencies that you feel that you need to address, if you go in and start pulling loads of bits out, you will not end up with a recording that is usable. If you're finding that the source material that you're working with has so many issues that your EQ looks all over the place, then you're much better off going back and recording again. You can never make a bad recording sound good. That's the first thing. The second thing is, whenever you're looking to equalize something, you should always have intent. Have an intention when you're going to equalize something. One of the biggest mistakes that you'll see from people is sticking an equalizer on every track and feeling the need to do something with EQ on every track. Sometimes tracks don't need any equalizing. Sometimes they were recorded really well and they sound great. And if that's the case, that's cool. Leave them alone. So those are the two big rules. If it sounds bad, re-record it, and don't equalize unless you can hear something that you need or want to do with it. With that said, we can break our two main EQ types, that's subtractive and additive, down into four subcategories. The first of those subcategories is to remove gross stuff. So when you listen to a source, you might listen and think, I can hear something in there that I don't like, or I can hear something in there that I don't want or need. You can go in therefore with an equalizer and find it and remove it. That's type number one. Type number two is to enhance the good stuff. So you might listen to something and go, oh, I really like that bit of the sound. I want to hear a bit more of it. So that will be known as enhancing the good stuff. The third type of equalizing we can do is to make things sound different. So with an equalizer, you can completely change the character of a sound by either significantly adding or significantly removing parts of the frequency spectrum. And we'll look at that in context as well. And the fourth thing that we can do with EQ is to create space for something. So, of course, when you have lots of different sound sources within the same mix, you'll have overlapping frequencies. You'll have shared frequency ranges between instruments, and you need to try and make space in some instances for one sound to be able to be more prominent in a certain frequency point than others. and we can create space for sounds with EQ in different sound sources, and we'll look at that as well. Okay, so let's try and look at these 4 different equalizing types. Let's look at these 4 jobs that we can do. Here's a little loop that I've got here. I'll play you these 4 tracks one at a time and then together. So here's a little drum loop that I grabbed. And then a bass part. And then a kind of a paddy thing. And then a lead part. Okay, so those are the 4 tracks that we've got to work with. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to consider all 4 of those tracks one at a time with our first task in hand. That is some subtractive or corrective EQing. So I'm going to listen to them and think, is there any gross stuff in here that I want to get rid of? So let's start with the drum. Now it sounds pretty good, but there is actually something in there that's a little bit kind of thick and muddy that I would like to get rid of. Now I'm going to use the Pro Q3 because that's the parametric EQ that I use all the time, and you'll see some of my workflow things in here justify why I like to use it, but you can do most of these techniques, if not all of them, on whatever equalizer you've got. You can do it on the Logic stock EQ, no problem. So here is my equalizer on the drums, and I'm going to find the stuff that I don't like and get rid of it. Okay, so I've done what I want to do with this little drum loop. So you'll hear that I've found some frequencies in this classically muddy mid-range that I didn't like, so I've got rid of some of those. And then I've tamed the top end a little bit as well up there. Now, the Pro Q3 has a really nice feature built in, which is down here, which is this auto gain match. So it does its best to match the input and output signal of the equalizer. Now, not being fooled by volume is a really important thing with EQ, because if you turn up something, it automatically is going to make it sound better. What we want to try and do with all of our mixing decisions, especially EQ, is to try and match the input and output signal. So let's take this auto gain feature off and let's match this input and output signal manually. So we're going to look at our peak level down here. So I'm at minus 5.6 pre-EQ. Let's apply this. So I've lost 0.7 of a dB. So let's put that back in. And now we can A/B with our level matching done. Okay, so we've got exactly the same peak levels between the two things, so we know that we've gain staged correctly, and we're therefore comparing our before and after of this EQ accurately. It's a really important thing to do with EQ in order to ensure that you're not fooling your ears into thinking something sounds worse because we've, in this case, subtracted a load of frequencies, or conversely, something sounds better because we've added a load of things. Let's look at our bass, and let's see if there's anything that we want to subtract from here. And to me, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing kind of additionally weird going on in there. It's just a simple sub-bass kind of sound. So all of our frequency content is down here, and I'm going to leave it alone as it is. What about our kind of pad thing that is going on? Let's check that out. Maybe something in the mid-range. Okay, let's take the auto gain off and let's gain stage that. So we've lost 0.9 of a dB. Let's put that back in here. Cool, and then let's check out this lead part, this top line, and see if there's anything we dislike in here. Okay, so I'm just getting a bit of low-end stuff down here. It's probably not a problem at all, but for the sake of argument, let's say that I want to remove it. And let's see if we need to level match that at all. So we've got to actually trim that back just the tiniest amount. Okay, so we've now done our subtractive EQing on these 4 parts. We can now A/B these pre and post EQ. This is pre. And post. Okay, subtle differences. So that's option 1. Now, why is it that I've gone with a parametric EQ to do those jobs? Well, because when I'm taking frequencies out of a sound source, I don't really want to be adding any additional color or character to it. With a parametric EQ, with a digital EQ, you're not going to be getting any additional saturation or analog emulation that might be coloring or adjusting the sound in any kind of non-linear kind of way. So for any subtractive EQ jobs, I would basically exclusively do it with a digital parametric EQ. I would also almost always do it first at the beginning of my signal chain, because I don't want to be, for example, compressing any of these sounds later on or putting on additional effects, maybe reverbs or delays to make them sound a bit more lush and full, still containing the frequencies that I dislike in them. It's much better that I find those frequencies that I dislike and remove them first before any other processing that happens, so that further processing is only happening to the bits of the sound that I want to retain. Okay, let's move on to EQ type 2, which is to enhance the good stuff. Now, let's say that I want to enhance some of the characteristic traits of some of these tracks. Let's see how we can do that. And I'm going to deliberately show you that with 4 different equalizers so that you can get a feel for the different ways in which some of these things work. So let's start with our drum loop here, and I've pulled up a Neve 1073 EQ onto this channel. Now, a Neve 1073 EQ is super famous. People love its simplicity because it's got fixed bands to work with. So it's got a high shelf, which is set at around 12K. It's got one bell or notch or whatever you want to call it with a bunch of selectable bands, and then it's got a low shelf as well, plus a high pass filter. So with this particular drum loop, I think what I want to do is try and enhance the low end, the kick sound, and then what I'm going to try and do is give it a bit more snap in the upper end, and then I'm going to need to level match that. So let's check out this low band first of all. I've just put on a limiter at the end of the chain just so that nothing is going to be clipping your end. Let's see what we've got going on with this low band. Let's start up at the 220 Hertz range. I'm going to put in a big boost and then hear these 4 different bands. Cool, I like what that is doing. Let me level match that as well. So pre-EQ, peaking at -5.8. So I put in 4.2 dB. So I'm going to trim with the gain here. Okay, let's listen to the high end. And let's find some snap in here as well. Cool, I like that. Let's level match. So I know that we're at -5.6. Okay, so it feels a bit quieter, but the overall sound of it I like more. So we're going to have to rebalance our other parts later on, but for the time being, we are good. Now, let's look at this sub bass. For this, let's use an API. So here we go. Okay, getting a nice extra wedge of sub bass from these 2 bands down at 31 and 63 Hertz. Let's level match that pre and post. Okay, and let's hear those 2 elements together before and after those additive EQs. Okay, let's have a listen to this pad next of all. And on this, let's use an SSL EQ. So let's grab a 4000E SSL and let's have a listen to it and see if there's anything that we want to do to it. we can just make sure that the low end is filtered out properly. Which there's no issue with. And the high end with this low pass filter. Yeah, so I prefer it taking out some of that real kind of top end. Let's now have a look at the kind of mid-range and see if there's anything pleasant that we might want to add a little bit more of. Okay, I like that boost at about 870 Hertz. And what else have we got? Is there any kind of anything just below this filter that we might want to push a little bit with this shelf perhaps? Yeah, I like that. So let's level match that. Let's A/B it. Cool. And finally, let's have a look at this lead part. And for this, let's use a Parametric EQ. Why not? Okay. Now here, I definitely do want to enhance that kind of grittiness. And let's level match that. So let's turn it off. Almost identical. Cool. Okay. So I've now shaped the character of each of these four parts as I would like them. Let's A/B these now, pre and post the additive. And let's also do that, but pre the subtractive as well. So let's take off all the EQ. And all back in. Okay, so we've subtracted the stuff that we dislike, we've shaped the EQ, we've carved the character in a direction that we like more. The third thing that we can do is to make things sound different. So what about if we wanted to, for example, filter this lead line in a way that was going to make it a bit more interesting? Let's have a look at that on the Pro Q3. And what I'm going to do is to automate this band's frequency. So we're going to have it all the way up, basically off. We're going to pull it down to, let's call it 1K-ish. And maybe that is not doing enough for me. So let's pull all those down a little bit further. Okay, so now I've used EQ to change the character of something or to change its sound. The fourth thing that we can do is to use EQ to create space. So a classic place that you might do that is with drums and bass. What I'm actually going to do for this example is I'm going to put another Pro Q3 on all of these channels, and the reason why will become apparent in due course. I'm going to solo out the bass here, okay? I'm then going to set the sidechain input of the bass to the drums. And I'm going to, in the analyzer here, be able to see the sidechain input as well. So the red signal here is the frequency curve from the drums. And we can see in this red area down here, we've got some masking. So when that kick drum is hitting down in the bottom end here, that sub bass is in the way of it. So what can we do about that? Well, in this instance, I'm going to use some dynamic EQ to get the sub bass out of the way when that kick drum is hitting. Okay, so I'm getting some 80 Hertz out of the way of the sub bass there, but I want to make more of it. So now I'm going to go to my drums, and I'm actually going to basically do the opposite of that in here. So I'm going to do some expansion in here to enhance that kick drum. And let's hear those two channels with and without that EQ. So clearly much more kick drum present when we're making space in that sub bass for it to come through. What about on these upper channels here? So you can see we've got a good amount of masking in this area here, around sort of 600 in the mid-range. And I want that pad, that swell, to be really prevalent there. So in fact, rather than using the Pro Q3 here, I'm going to use a different plugin, which is called Track Spacer, but with the exact same principle. So I'm going to set the sidechain input to the choir, and then this is going to dip all of the frequency content that is present in the other channel with this ratio amount here. So you hear how this is really dipping that lead line out of the way when those swells are in there. So I'm making space with EQ. Let's hear this whole loop, pre all of our EQ and then post. Here's before. with everything. Okay, so we've illustrated the 4 points that we're looking to illustrate. We've looked at removing gross stuff. We've looked at enhancing nice stuff. We've looked at making things sound different, and we've looked at creating space. Now, one thing that I haven't told you exclusively, why is it that I've used analog style EQs here for shaping the character? Well, the reason is that it's better, I believe, to do the tone shaping part of the process with an equalizer that doesn't have a graphic representation of the frequency spectrum. If you're doing it on a parametric EQ like this, you can be misled by what you can see which is going on. To me, that's more useful when you're looking to surgically correct things, but when you're looking to shape the sound of something, I believe it's better to use your ears, and therefore to work with an analog style EQ like any of these that we've illustrated here, I believe is a better way to work. That's the first reason. The second reason is that all of these equalizers, because they're all modeled on, proper hardware, they all have some sort of character, some sort of tone that they're going to be imparting onto your signal. What that means is that you're going to get a little bit of saturation out of them, and if you drive their signals more and more, you'll get a bit more saturation out of them. That's generally a good thing when we're working in the box, because we want to try and impart some non-digital characteristics, and they'll all work in a non-linear way. What non-linear means is that it basically won't reproduce exactly the same thing each time like a parametric EQ will, because they're based on analog hardware. That's real components in electronics that is going to respond differently ever so slightly to the input signal each time, even if the input signal is identical. So non-linearity in your mixes is a good thing, because it makes it sound a bit more lifelike, a bit more human, a bit more real, and that is helpful when trying to get away from the digital stiffness that we can encounter if we're just working in the box. So I hope that's been useful for you. Those kind of 4 big tips are 4 things that I think that you should really kind of embed and ingrain in your practice. Always think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, which one of those 4 are you doing, and if you don't know, don't do anything. I'll be back for you very soon with the next part in this series. I'll see you soon.